Okay, hi everybody. I want to welcome you to another episode of the Word is Bond podcast, which is hosted by the Bond Educational Group. Each Friday, 12 noon, one of the Bond members engages in a discussion with leaders in education and business. Our conversations focus on how equity shows up in their industry. And last week it was Dr. Jason Otley who launched this podcast, this webcast. Today it's me. I'm Todd Mealy, the Director of Equity and Instruction for the Bond Educational Group, and I'll moderate a discussion today with our guest, Lenwood Sloan. But before I introduce our guest officially, I want to remind our viewers that our Equity Summit is quickly approaching. The summit is scheduled for February 8th through the 10th, 2022. And although it'll be virtual, the Bond team will be headquartered at Florida Memorial University, located in Miami. So be sure to go online, check out the event, purchase your ticket. You can take a look at www.theequitysummit.com. Our theme this year is Rising Together, and we are even more excited about our speaker lineup at the event. And so you can get details on speakers and other issues related to the Equity Summit. Again, visit www.theequitysummit.com. So what we do on this webcast is chat with educators and thought leaders that work in the field of education or in the corporate, legal, or nonprofit arenas, and who strive to create just and equitable spaces for all people. And today, our esteemed guest is Lenwood Lenny Sloan. So, Lenwood, I'm going to give you a moment here to speak, but we do these podcasts or these webcasts so our viewers can get to know our guests, but also so our guests can share nuggets and ideas. They can share strategies that may be able to be incorporated into our viewers' spaces. I think our viewers are going to be very impressed with you. So I want to run through, if you don't mind, and this could take a minute here, but I want to run through your bio here and let everybody know, who I'm going to be speaking with today. So, Lenwood, you're known as a catalytic agent, an animator, a facilitator of cultural and heritage programs, and you've done that for more than 40 years, working in both the public and private sectors in the United States and Ireland. I'm probably forgetting somewhere else too. I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to read an exhaustive list of all the endeavors that you've led. Lenwood has been the Deputy Director of Services for the California Arts Council. He's been the Director of the New Orleans Arts and Tourism. You are the recipient of the Louisiana Travel and Tourism Leadership Award for Business Innovations. You worked and this is how we met, you worked in the former Pennsylvania Governor N. Rendell's administration as Director of Cultural and Heritage Tourism. You've been Pennsylvania's coordinator for the International Institute for Peace through Tourism, a board member for the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, Lancaster, Pennsylvania's Public Arts Program. You've been on the board of the African American and Irish Diaspora Project. You've been director of the National Endowment for the Arts' Presenting and Commission Program, the executive director of the Pennsylvania Monuments Project, which erects and preserves monuments throughout the Commonwealth. And you have performance credits that include creating art in the marketplace programs for the Rouse Corporation in New Orleans, St. Louis, Baltimore, and Boston. You've participated in five national public television documentaries, which include the Emmy Award-winning Dance Black America and the Emmy Award-winning Ethnic Notions, which is a popular documentary directed by Marlon Riggs that traces deeply rooted anti-Black stereotypes through minstrelsy performances, porcelain figures, books, songs, and a lot more. Lenwood has been a dancer, an activist, an educator, and a scholar. and you've, as of late, written articles for the Harrisburg publication, The Berg. So your footnote is all over this country, but as it is of late, it's all over Pennsylvania, at heritage sites, historical signposts, and monuments. So Linwood, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Todd. I hope your viewers don't take this the wrong way, but I do want you to do my eulogy when I think you just did it. So thank you very much.
No, yeah, but it's impressive, impressive resume. You've done a lot. People are going to learn a lot more about you in the time we have today. I'm going to keep our conversation in the wheelhouse of equity and education, but clearly our conversation can go much broader than that. I want to warm us up, Lenwood, with really maybe a question or conversation about how we met. You know, we met in 2010. You were directing the 150th anniversary of the USCT Grand Review, or the African American Patriots of the Civil War Grand Review, that was originally held in Harrisburg on November 14th, 1865. And I was living in Lancaster at the time, and I read an article in the Harrisburg Patriot, I think it was then. It could have been Penn Live, but nonetheless, I was doing some research on one of the people that you were trying to tell a story of, William Howard Day. Can you tell us really not so much that story of the USCT Grand Review and the commemoration of that event, but your path that led you to working for the Rendell administration, Pennsylvania's Director of Cultural and Heritage Tourism, and how that job positioned you working with educators in the Commonwealth, like myself?
Yes. Well, my direct path to I share a zigzagged pathway through Pennsylvania, both through the state and through my history. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had two absolutely exceptional teachers who formed my early love of both history and the use of art to explore culture and the dynamic difference between race and culture, ethnicity and tradition. The first was my English teacher, Herman J. McLean, who led me first to words, then to speeches, and then to great oratory. The second was my history teacher, Miss Sarah Labarsky. And Sarah Labarsky taught history through interdisciplinary work. So if you were studying the French Revolution, you were studying French fashion and French food and French language and country language versus city language. And she was taking you to the Carnegie Museum and taking you through the French painters. And he would have you compare Monet to Debussy and Renoir, an incredible teacher. She left an imprint on me. But the biggest imprint was to enroll me in the what was called the Student United Nations. It was the United Nations program where high schools represented countries, and they voted every Saturday at the University of Pittsburgh. They held a Youth United Nations, and it was my first model of historic restoration or reenactment, because we literally reenacted the voting. So they left me with a patina, and they also left me with a scholarship to Temple University, where I first started as a history student, and then in my sophomore year shifted to the arts and was taken into the Alvin Ailey Dance Company's apprentice school just at the death of Martin Luther King. We were sent into Wilmington, Delaware, to use dance as a way of infusing pride and defusing riots. while the streets of Wilmington were burning. And so I was immediately immersed in the open schools were closed. Classrooms were held in churches and in Ys and on street corners and at bus stops. And so it gave me my kind of interdisciplinary work that led me to my love for history and my responsibility for Pennsylvania to reconstruct the 150th anniversary of the Civil War in Pennsylvania. We came upon the event that in May of 1865, Union soldiers were invited to Washington, D.C. To march in the Grand Review and muster out. I became both intrigued and alarmed that the 180,000 USCT colored troops were not invited to march. And when Washington
earlier in May.
Earlier in May. And then I became even more intrigued that I was sitting upon a story about the Henry Highland Garnet Society and the women of the Garnet Society organizing a call with the assistance of the Pennsylvania Railroad for USCT soldiers to come and march in Harrisburg from the old 8th Ward to Simon Cameron's house to be mustered out. We learned then that Thomas Morris Chester and Octavio Cato were the Grand Masters of that parade, and William Howard Day was the keynote speaker. So I set out to find the research of particularly the keynote speaker, again, because of Mr. McLean's teaching me about you start with great oratories. So I started with these speeches of William Howard Day, and everyone kept saying, you need to talk to Todd Mealy. He's written these 2 books. So I arranged to see Todd Mealy, and I was waiting there expecting a venerable old African-American gentleman, to be standing there. And there was this young Irish American football coach,
Coach football.
A good lesson on the difference between race and culture again. We were from different races, but we shared a cultural identity and capacity. And so your 2-volume book became the anchor of our research for the Grand Review.
That's a great summary of that project. This is not a history webcast, and I'd love to talk the history because you brought up a bunch of nuggets about the USCT Grand Review. But I have to keep it, focused on education here. So what I want to ask you is in the same vein. You found a way during that 150th anniversary, this major project that wasn't a Harrisburg thing, it was a Pennsylvania thing. That brought in people from other states, but you found a way to provide agency to educators to get involved in that project and for teachers to get their students involved in that project. Can you tell us a little bit? Can you tell us a little bit?
Well, I want to start by answering saying keep it focused on the history. I was alarmed that I credited myself as a fairly good history student, a pretty good Civil War student, and I had never been taught, in 12 years of high school, 4 years of undergraduate work, and 2 years of graduate work, although I didn't finish my degree. I went off to dance, but that no one had ever mentioned the Grand Review to me. And let alone in any Pennsylvania history class, in any American history class, in any African American history class. And here I was working literally on the spot where it occurred. Yeah. The original Wesley AME Church and Bethel AME Church, which anchor the old 8th Ward, their footprint are under the east wing of the Capitol building. My offices were in the Keystone building. So I thought, how do we, at another time we would have called it school to career or project-based learning. You know, I've been in the educational field of the classroom is the community, and the community is the classroom. So we've changed the titles over 4 decades. Every decade, in Louisiana, I worked with school to career kids. In California, it was project-based learning, but the Grand Review became a project-based learning course with the disappearance of civics and the isolation of fact about African American contributions to American culture. We thought we need to start by educating. So we went to the Pennsylvania System of Higher Education, PASHE, the 12 and 14
State university.
Universities in the state university system in Pennsylvania. Mm. And we talked to theater and history teachers and deans of the departments, and we convinced them that the young men in the Grand Review were 18 to 25-year-olds. Now it's 50, 60, 70-year-old men reenacting 18-year-old men. But we said, what if we recruited 100 young men from the 12 campuses through the Frederick Douglass societies that were on each of the main campuses? And we immersed them in the history of one of these men from the Pennsylvania regiments that had gone through the 54th or 55th or through Camp William Penn. We took them to the cemeteries where their parents, grandparents were buried. We took them to the churches where they belonged to before and after the war. We immersed them in the families and the families in their histories. And then these young men would march in November 14th of 2014 down Commonwealth Avenue as the 100 voices of the Grand Review. And as you'll remember, you came to, I think, Penn State to work with those young men. Yep. So this was immersion history. The event, the legacy, the final resting places, which spawned the Pennsylvania Hallowed Ground Project, where we adopted the cemeteries that the African American soldiers were in and helped to restore their grave sites. It started as a parade. It ended as a curriculum and a training program and a family reunion and genealogy experience, and finally the families in each of the counties that they represented, placing their families' archives into the public library for enrichment and the edification through teacher training and in-service training, so that teachers could go and find these lessons that were not in history books.
That's great. I do recall you had teachers from, I was there, you had Cumberland Valley there, you had some other local central Pennsylvania high school teachers and students coming to some events there. Again, if you're just joining us, we're here with Mr. Lenny Sloan, the living foundation of Pennsylvania's culture and heritage programs. His work permeates K-12 schools in colleges throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Much of his work also engages with college and universities in PA. As he mentioned, the 14 Pennsylvania state universities. Lenny has worked with Penn State's various campuses, Messiah University, Harrisburg Area Community College, among many others. Lenwood, you're not currently a classroom teacher, but you work with K-12 educators and K-12 students all the time. So I mentioned before that I see you as that linchpin between schools and community. So could you tell us what is the role of community in driving teaching and learning in our schools?
Excuse me. I am not sure, Todd, when or where I learned this term that parents drive their kids to school at kindergarten and come back and pick them up at 12th grade. But whoever told me that, it shocked me and echoed me because it was true, with the exception of some benchmarks, graduating from kindergarten, passing to middle school. You know, the involvement of the parent in the impacting and shaping of the learning experience, at least I experience as being faint. And so in every program that I have done since 1968, with the Alvin Ailey Company in Wilmington's Burning City, we have gone deep into community and said, what do you know, starting at the kitchen table, you know, about your own history? And then what do you know about your history's contribution to a greater history and a legacy? And I have to say that I get this from my father. I'm one of 6 kids. We had to cut something out of the newspaper every day. Every day. My father was a bricklayer. My mother was a domestic, but we had to come to the dinner table with an article. And we had to discuss the article and present why we felt it was important to bring that to the family. And so I began with article and artifact at my dinner table. P.S. I have an older brother who was also a wrestler. So he would wrestle me on the stairs for my article. So I had to have 2. I had to have one that I would give up to him, and then one of equal portion that and so that began my father's thing about switch the articles around now. Everybody talk about everybody else's article or respond. So I didn't know until I was 50 years old the term Lyceum and Chautauqua, but he formed Lyceum and Chautauqua over lima beans and rice, you know, at his dinner table. And it was a teaching technique that I took into homes. When I was in Louisiana, the late, great Lindy Boggs, who was the wife of Hell Boggs and was ambassador to the Vatican, commissioned me to do a piece called 13 Lessons. And 13 Lessons was a piece that was based upon the 6 lessons in language and 7 lessons in math that determined adult illiteracy. And the problem was that 44% of parents in Louisiana were adult, functionally illiterate, working 2 or 3 jobs, and could not advance because they couldn't read a bus schedule or a recipe or, you know, the prescription on the side of a bottle. And but they were hardworking, you know, 2 or 3 job households, still working hard. So we began very early through the school to career programs in Louisiana to say that if we were going to work with kids who were not going to go to college, but they were going to go into their careers, what did they need to know? And what did their parents need to know to help them? And so we began adult illiteracy classes after school while we baked bread with families and cooked for them in their kitchen so that they could begin to help their kids. And it began to build out a curriculum in weights and measures around someone's father who couldn't read or write but could raise a barn, you know, and was a great mathematician. Didn't know from algebra or geometry, but could cut a board so well that it fit, you know, and also teaching the child's respect for the craft of the parent or the labor of the parent. So while I kept wanting to slide back to dates and events, I began to find that the true teaching method was in storytelling around a historical piece and then deconstructing that piece into a language class, a math class. To do that, you had to remove a lot of cultural bias from the, I had a European education, you know, I know more about Renoir than I know about Jacob Lawrence. You know, and I could go on. We don't have the time. So I thought it is time to bring homes, school, and community into an equilateral triangle around the whole child.
Yeah. Yeah. I do believe, well, you said a lot of things that are starting with the newspaper clips. I have a 7 and a 4-year-old. They're too young for that, but I wish they were old enough to do something like that now. I have a difficult time keeping them sitting down at dinner, you know, and not playing with their food, but someday. But that went all the way to this thread of adult education. And, you know, there's services for adult learners. The intermediate units across Pennsylvania provide services, literacy councils provide services for adult learners. But that's a different aspect that I think a lot of people don't think about. So I think a framework exists to build a partnership between schools and communities. And I believe, you know, what you're saying here in your work offers us something valuable in allowing educators to look to communities to create more inclusive, more enjoyable learning experiences for students.
While I was at the National Endowment for the Arts, and I had the opportunity to be at the National Endowment for the Arts at a time when the endowment was taken to Congress, was going to lose its budget over funding a group of experimental avant-garde interdisciplinary artists that were thought to be lascivious and trash. We had to defend their work. And one was Andrew Serrano. Now, Andrew Serrano, really quickly, here's a 90-second download on Serrano. Serrano had created a series of museum shows called The Piss Christ, and he had put crucifixes into bottles of urine of famous people that he knew. Now, what he was referencing was an old reliquarium in Italy of an altar full of bones of saints' bones in jars in saline. What Congress saw was smut. So we had to go in and explain to the Congress of the United States about funeral rituals and reliquariums and vaults with saints' bones in them. And you're saying, you know this. You do this on your Sunday morning when you take communion. You know, you are reliving this, and it was only by commonality and comparison, moving from what was safe in their learning place and cultural identity to embrace a wider set of aesthetics. And I always say that the endowment taught me the lesson of the justification through deep immersion into a cultural experience. What is the artist trying to get to in his or her world? I'm working on an article right now before you called me today about the Gaelic leagues of Ireland outlawing jazz dancing in 1921 as they reached deeper for what was Irish about Irish music and dance. And Glenn Miller and Louis Armstrong, they had posters, do your children listening to these devils, and now we have Riverdance. And we have the assimilation of jazz and Irish dancing into pop and cultural music, where through time and investigation, we've learned to appreciate difference. And at the same time that I was at the endowment there, Todd, there is a brilliant woman. She is still quite alive. Her name is Dr. Marta Vega. She is the director of the Caribbean Cultural Center in New York City. And Marta spoke quite eloquently at a national conference that within my race, there are many cultures. And that was an important presentation for me. We started a 10-year movement called Cultural Diversity Based on Cultural Ground. And we tried to create a glossary that special, cultural specificity is different than cultural diversity. And cultural diversity is different than cultural inclusion. And inclusion is different than multiculturalism or fusion or competency. These are all colors in the coloring box. And you should not confuse the blue with the red, and that we had to begin to educate ourselves. You are Jewish, I am African American, you're going to celebrate Juneteenth, and I'm going to celebrate, Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah. We're not going to try to be those things. That's cultural specificity, respecting a culture. Diversity is you're Haitian and I am Scottish, and wow, I'm digging that. I'm digging your Haitianness, and get off on my Scottish. And fusion is like fajita pitas or pizza bagels, or where we take these two things and we put them together. And now we're into competency, and which is different than multiculturalism. And so the work that you all are doing is very important, because we have been looking at these terms as synonyms and these cultures as monolithic. Mm-hmm. And the work to do next is to begin to look even deeper,
I have to apologize for our viewers, because you're throwing out so much that deserves questions. But if I ask questions to dig in a little deeper, we're going to be here for too long.
Go.
So we'll have you back.
But I'll just say the work you're doing with your colleagues and those who are viewing is important, because we are beginning to see the colors in the crayon box. We have been only coloring. First, we were only coloring with black and white. Then we moved to like the primary colors. Now we got 98 colors in the box,
right.
And
I can speak to that personally with my young kids, and they're coloring all the time. But you said some things, so I'm going to take this maybe a little bit out of the community into the classroom realm. But like when you typify family and community engagement, what you do with teachers is help them build curricular practice. And, a lot of these curricular practices are under text. So what do you make of, speaking of your prior experience with attacks of a different nature, what do you make of the political attacks on diversifying the curriculum in schools today, in this current moment?
I think it is the last great, well, let me go backward to go forward very quickly. So I'm a historian, but not a scholar. I'm a humanist, and a storyteller. And my card says catalytic agent. And I hope that my stories are catalysts for people who are scholars to move their minds around it like the kaleidoscope and begin to make different pictures. Having said that, this is about the fourth attack on the notion of teaching diversity. It always comes when the power structure is frightened about the last gasp of what I refer to as perpetual whiteness. And the attack on teaching, the attack on 1619, or the attack on cultural competency, is an attack on the achievement of the American dream. We had between 1865 and 1876 a real attempt at the American dream. And every 10 years, 20 years, the pendulum swings between the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is a statement of it's a vision statement. The Constitution is a contract. So now we are in the contract again. We are like, who is in and who is out? And you know, you are not, because you are so in, I have to keep you out. I have to do everything I can to keep you out. And so, you know, it's not been very long in the terms of the length of mankind, that book burnings and the reversals of ideas. You know, we see all through our television now, Todd, multicultural, multiracial couples, biracial children. I can remember a time in my own life where we would run to the TV when somebody said, look, there's a Black person on TV, run, run, quick, you missed her. You know, she was there, she was really there. You know, now we take it as a given. And at the same time, we have lawsuits against AGMA, SAG, because we do have Black actors in front of the camera, but not Black directors behind that camera, or Latinx script writers. And so the contract called the Constitution is about the economic divide of America. And the Declaration of Independence is about the vision of who we think we are and who we should become. And I see your colleagues doing the vision work, the declaring work, against the overt background and a shrinking landscape, you know, of the ability to achieve that vision. And so I'm very disturbed that we're in what the Hindus call the Kali Yuga, which means falling backwards into darkness. You know, and we must resist that. Teachers and school districts can't do it alone. Parents have to insist on the diversity of education. You know, we've been talking about children's books, and should white parents buy Black or Latin or Asian children's books? And the answer is yes, because if your child never sees anybody except the people who look like him or her, then when they look up from the book, across the landscape, across the room, across America, all they will see is themselves. And that's not fact. And so that's hypnosis. So
Yeah, I so much to say. But just in this moment, and because of time, I just wonder the long-term impact on this. I mean, we're talking about 80% of educators are white, you know, in public schools. And so there has been the push over the last 10 years to really diversify curriculum, change pedagogy, pedagogical practices, you know, get teachers of color in front of students of color, encourage students of color to go on and become teachers, establish pipelines within schools, and you know, to get rid of the structural issues that create an aversion to school systems. You know, not learning, but school systems. And you know, what is this going to do? You know, all that effort that has been made, you know, we're going to find ourselves 10, 15 years from now and still see 80% of the educators are white.
well, you know, there's a couple of things you said, and I know our time is, it is important. You know, I am glad that with the exception of Miss Sarah Labarsky and Miss Inez Laster, the librarian. The library was the place I escaped to, by the way. If you live in a house with 6 brothers and sisters, the library is the place for you to go. But all my high school teachers were Black. And what I didn't see them as Black teachers, I saw them as exceptional educators. You know, they infused in me pride of self. And I'm sure that when you have a Latin teachers, if you are Latin, you know, or Asian teachers, if you are Asian, the the sense of self identity is the first door, but excellence is the only door. You know, so culturally competent teachers are what we want, what we hope for, no matter what color they are. We want a balance to reflect the classroom, but we do not want to place people there simply because of the color. You know, but we want to make sure that we have excellence in cultural competency. Now, I love my father. I love him to death. He's gone now to heaven. He would say to me, and my father believed that he was the most liberal man in the Western world. And yet he would say to me, who here wants chinks tonight? You know, and we would all, what did you just say? He was like, that's what everybody calls them. Right, yeah, but that everybody is perpetuating that thing. Or we're going to go over to Jewtown on Sunday because it's the only market. And we'd say, Daddy, you can't say that. And he'd say, well, everybody says that. Well, yeah, everybody except the people in Jewtown or the chinks that are selling this to you. So, I until my father passed, and I said at his bedside, we talked about that's just the way it's always been versus does it have to be that way? And he was, he said, I have to admit to who I am and what I'm made of in order to move forward. And that's why I think that these conversations about cultural competency is people have to admit their biases, especially teachers. If you look across the room and you only see the white students, or if you look across the room and you only see the Asian students because you have been so suppressed that that's only the only student you're teaching to. All of those are human constructs which we need to deconstruct and reconstruct in order to have effective and affirmative classroom teaching. But I go back with the little time that I have left and say the classroom cannot be the only place where learning takes place. And if the parent and the community are not partners in that learning experience, then we have a lopsided equation. It never comes out right.
That's a really good close. Yeah, it's a really good closing point. Talk about excellence and cultural competence. Look, when people get involved in affecting social and educational change, they usually think national. But you, Linwood, are an individual that has footprints all over local communities. From Dublin to New Orleans, from Baltimore to Harrisburg. Where you spend a lot of time now.
Let me tell you one other quick thing. It'll only take me 30 seconds.
Yeah, but no, you have the last word.
I have been lucky to meet informed, visionary educators, and I have appreciated our partnership, Todd, and I'm glad to be invited. But I want to leave your listeners and your colleagues with this story. In 1970, in Berkeley, California, when we were dealing again with the whole issue about diversity, I was hired by Berkeley School District to be the Black Arts Specialist. And in my interview, I said, am I the Black Arts Specialist or the Black Arts Specialist? One day I even came to school with a cape. I said, oh, I know, it's Berkeley and I'm the Black Arts person, they kept saying, what difference does it make? I said, it does make a difference, because if I'm the Black Arts Specialist, I'm supposed to show the breadth and depth of the arts through my African-American aesthetic. If I'm the Black Arts Specialist, I'm supposed to codify and define and move forward into your consciousness the impact and the contributions of Black artists. What are we trying to do here? We're using the same words, but do we understand? Do we define them and define the task the same? They never figured it out. They were just happy to have one more Black body on the faculty so that they could fulfill federal mandate. And I always felt I did the very best I could without the administration and the pedagogy defining what is the purpose of this curriculum. You know, is it the Harlem Renaissance or is it James Baldwin in Paris? You know, at world art. And so we got to get it right ourselves before we can take it forward to the classroom and to the curriculum. That's where I'll leave you.
Yeah, well, thanks for the closing comment here, Lenwood. Thanks for your time, much appreciated, and I'm sure we'll have you back. Thank you.
You've got a carte blanche card with me.
Sounds good. Now, before our viewers go, I just want to take this final opportunity to remind everyone about the Bond Educational Group's Equity Summit, a 3-day virtual event, February 8th to the 10th of 2022. It will feature speakers in the field of education, but also beyond education as well. So visit www.theequitysummit.com for more information and about the event, but also to purchase tickets. Mr. Sloan,
thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us.